It's a hard day's late night with Ira. Every night it's feeling alright. It's a hard day's late night with Ira. Why not come over tonight? We talk about everything under the moon. Your favorite cartoon or song you love. You never really know just how it might go. Why don't we get things started? It's a hard day's late night with Ira. It's a hard day's late night with Ira. It's a hard day's late night with Ira. A hard day's late night with Ira.
Tonight's episode of A Hard Day's Late Night with Ira is brought to you by our new sponsor, the Tri-County area's best discount optical chain, See If I Care. Come in, don't come in, see if I care. Welcome to episode 10 of A Hard Day's Late Night with Ira. I'm Ira. Surprisingly, the drum set, as we recognize it today, is only about 75 years old. And in that 75 years, millions of things about it have changed, and a small handful of things remain constant. Hardware will get heavier and more elaborate, while the jokes about how you know there's a drummer knocking on your front door will never grow old. And I think I either read a review or I maybe just stumbled upon it on my iPad. It was a book called Kick It! By one Matt Brennan. And with the attention to detail and thoroughness of the academic that he is, he told the story of the modern drum set and drumming from its birth in military drumming of the 19th century through the development and production of the spring bass drum pedal, which really changed the game in about 1909, on through jazz and to become one of the most, if not the most important foundational element of 20th century popular music. The drum set is an object I've obsessively focused on since I was a teenager, but I never realized how little I knew about how the instrument evolved, how music evolved to need the drum set, how the drum set in return changed music, how music was recorded, how drummers were perceived, what kinds of work they did. I was completely slack-jawed through most of it. How did I not know any of this? Well, because you wouldn't. But now, because Matt has done all the legwork, you can read this 500-page book very quickly and know pretty much all there is to know. Matt Brennan is a professor of popular music at the University of Glasgow. And this book, Kick It! A Social History of the Drum Kit, was named one of the best music books of 2020 by the Financial Times. The book was also lauded by some of rock's most well-known drummers, beside myself, including Bill Bruford of the Yes and the King Crimsons, who called it compulsory reading for the inquisitive drummer, and Nick Mason of the Pink Floyds, who claimed, if you're really interested in drumming, this is the one book that you need. And once again, Nick Mason and I are on the same page. Matt Brennan's first monograph, When Genres Collide, was named one of Pitchfork's favorite music books of 2017, so he's on a roll. I recorded this interview with Matt Brennan some time ago now, and between then and now, I had the good fortune to meet him briefly in New York City. Not a Surf was playing in September of 2024 at WNYC's 100th anniversary radio show in Central Park. And at the same moment, Matt was on vacation, coincidentally, in the city with his wife. And it was a great pleasure to meet the both of them in person. So here is my conversation with Matt Brennan here on A Hard Day's Late Night with Ira. I'm a professional drummer my whole life. I'm one of those guys who came to drumming probably, I'm going to bring him up a lot, but I'm a Ringoist. I'm of a generation who I grew up, rock music was really the only music that I ever identified with. I have no background in jazz or classical music. I don't read. I'm one of those kids who grew up listening to the radio and watching television and drawn to Ringo specifically, but in general, rock music was my world. And I was drawn as an individual to do that and spent my entire life, even to this point, absolutely obsessed with being a drummer and my own version of whatever drum culture is, which I had to kind of glean from the atmosphere.
Yeah.
When I grew up in the '70s, you know, there was Modern Drummer, I suppose, as a publication. That was probably the heart of drum culture. The sort of there was no central drum knowledge really up till that point. There was, you know, sort of like you had to go to a teacher or you read a book or something like that. It was sort of it was out in the air what drummers did, how they did it. I had no idea. I had to, you know, I learned from listening and watching.
Yeah,
And
much the same for me. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I grew up maybe a little bit later, but before the internet, certainly, and definitely before the kind of interactive era of the internet, where drummers around the world congregate, can see one another, and also talk back and forth to one another, and that seems almost like a requisite for what we understand as being a culture is, you know, a community that's in dialogue with one another, and that's a two-way street. Whereas, you know, just like you were talking about, you know, trying to glean what drum culture was from the ether, or you would get clues that
yeah,
that maybe drummers were perceived a little bit differently, or you know, had slightly different values to other sorts of musicians, different challenges. You know, those things were a bit more piecemeal in terms of our discovery, and probably not least when we started trying to make money out
right.
of our love for playing the drums. You know?
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so exactly. So I remember, for example, as I started playing the drums, that I knew that though my unstated goal was really to be a drummer in a rock band, I knew that jazz drummers were quote unquote better somehow. They were better. They were more advanced than rock drummers. And so my early attempts to play were with, you know, I'm trying to teach myself. Well, I guess my first teacher taught me a little bit about match grip. She was not a drummer. She was just she was the school music teacher. So she didn't really know too much about it, but she had learned a little. I think she tried to show me a traditional grip, and I learned some very basic rudimental stuff from her. But again, being a Ringoist, I went to match grip. It was easier for me to manipulate, and I became a match grip drummer. I'm sort of fascinated. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to him because there's a couple of topics about Ringo that I think we could discuss. But one is that, you know, he was the first match grip drummer really that anyone had ever seen.
Sure.
You know, he showed up, and you know, every other rock drummer up at that point was also had been from a jazz background and played in it with a jazz grip. Elvis's drummer, all the Buddy Holly's drummer, they were all they were all trad grip guys, but here was
Yeah.
Ringo pounding away, straight grip. Again, you know, a host of contradictions. He was possibly, you know, the most interesting, the most loved, the biggest scream, and yet he was also, well, he wasn't very good, or he was not a very good drummer, was he? You know, he was tarred all his career, even to this day. You know, I'm in the league of Ringo defenders. You know, like as if he needs to be constantly. You know, people need to be reminded that it's not all about blazing technique; it's about musicality.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah. Absolutely.
and that's the thing that I gleaned from overall. That was the lesson that I took from most of my favorite drummers, was not necessarily about technique. More so, it was about personality. I'm always fascinated with how drummers' personalities come out in their drumming.
Yeah.
The kind of person you are is the kind of drummer you are. If you're a technical mad, you know, you're a Neil Peart, or you're a Ringo. You're a simple guy who just wants to do a job. But my knowledge of everything previous to that was kind of, you know, like it was a sort of a cloudy, like what happened before 1956? I really don't know. And that's why Kick It was so enlightening across the board, from the development of, you know, going from military drumming to dance band drumming, or vaudeville drumming, or show drumming, or drummers who had to play along with the movie screen in a movie theater, which I'd never ever considered how integral that job would be. A piano player, of course, but a drummer, like a Foley artist, to do all the sound effects. Hence, you
Yeah.
know, our the original seeing the drummer. Well, the origin of Trap Kit obviously is in debate, but the idea of this sort of whether it's a contraption or a series of things that you had to play. What's the other
Yeah.
trap being short for
Trappings.
trap?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that kind of
trappings.
Victorian
Trappings.
term. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic, and that to me was really enlightening. This and the again, I saw it from one end. There was drummers who were very showy and flashy, and that also goes way back because drummers have a different. We don't have to hold the instrument in our mouths. We have our
Yeah.
hands free, which gives us a whole nother range of skills. We can put our hands in the air and flip sticks and do all this stuff that no one had ever seen before. So. So that all that was absolutely fascinating. And I want to just thank you as a drummer for putting this thing together, which sort of allows me to see, like what led up to the stuff that I sort of walked in the middle of the show. I'm like, oh, this all this stuff's going on. I'll just pick it up from
Yeah.
where I am and let it see what happens. Um,
Oh, well, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. I'm so
yeah,
glad that you connected with the book, you know?
yeah. No,
Uh,
I immediately.
I wrote it for drummers, you know?
Yeah, no, clearly it's well the thing is that obviously you don't need to be a drummer to understand it. It's very clear and it's a wonderful history. Again, you call it a social history because it ties. It's not just about drumming technique but the evolution of the kid and this wonderful interplay of how it's all these aspects. It's not one instrument; it's multiple instruments. It's not it grew like organically. It evolved. It wasn't one set thing, and to this day, every drummer makes their own drum set. It's a DIY thing. You want to play with
Definitely.
you want to
Yeah.
play with just kick and a floor tom and snare drum. You can do that. If you want to play an Octoplus, it took me years to figure out that Octoplus was simply a play on octopus. I never. It took me 20 years to figure that out. Oh, octopus, because there's like you have to be an octopus to play all these 8 drums.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, let me, I'll start talking about myself for a second. Let me talk about you. You obviously you're a drummer as well. I just want to hear your genesis. Like you came to the drums and then you became an academic. What was that? What was that journey?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess, I grew up in the suburbs of the east coast of Canada in a pretty remote town called Fredericton, New Brunswick. And
Mm,
when I say remote, it's a town of about 45,000 people, but the closest major cities were Montreal or Boston, both of which were an 8-hour drive away.
mm.
So I felt
Considerable.
pretty
Yeah.
far removed, right, from whatever the entertainment that you'd see on the television.
Mm.
Uh, Large acts didn't really pass through our town, and I was just kind of getting by as an awkward kid whose parents encouraged him to take piano lessons, and I did not connect with that at all. I kind of had an authoritarian teacher. I think
Same
this is
here.
not an uncommon story, you know.
I have
If you're
what you've just described is my story exactly. My took piano
Yeah,
lessons and hated it. Authoritarian teacher who I didn't like. I lived in New York City, the biggest city in the world, and still did not go out to see bands. I stayed in my house in Queens. I had the opportunity to
yeah.
go. I could have driven 10 minutes. I could have gotten on the subway and gone seen the greatest bands of the world. I did not do that for whatever reason. So our stories so
Well,
far
when
are
you're a
exactly the
kid,
same. Yeah, well,
it would be quite unusual to have the wherewithal, if
sure.
that isn't, if your family aren't working in the arts, or
Yeah,
gigging
how?
musicians themselves, then you're just a kid hanging around your neighborhood,
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
figure out your way in life.
right.
And and then I guess it's funny because I had actually read maybe when I was 10 years old or so
Hmm.
a children's book by a Canadian children's fiction author. His name was Gordon Corman,
Hmm.
and he had a kid's book called Who is Bugs Potter? And the protagonist of this book was uh, this kid who went to school, an everyday kid, but he could really play the drums. And he would like sneak out of the window at night and have adventures like playing the drum kit. And I just became totally fascinated by this because there was something about music that was appealing, even if my own personal experience of trying to learn music up to that moment
Hmm.
had been a negative one. And as soon as I got a pair of sticks in my hand, partly inspired weirdly by this book,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
and started hitting things, I realized, oh, this is actually a huge amount of fun. And from there, I was just, how do I do more of this? How do
Right.
I, how do
Yeah.
I get involved? And my parents were not very musical people, so I didn't grow up with the Beatles in the house or
Mm.
anything like that.
Yeah.
This was all from waiting for me to discover it as well, which was also quite wonderful because it meant that as soon as that door opened up for me and I thought, oh, I want to listen to everything I can that has drummers, and I want to learn how to hit things in rhythm.
Wow.
It was an identity that I started to form for myself that wasn't being imposed on me from anywhere else. Even though I grew up in the sort of 80s and 90s. You know, any be it jazz drummers from the first half of the 20th century or Ringo or whoever else,
Mm.
it was all like territory to be claimed within my very sheltered limited world of experience. So the Beatles, sounds like same for yourself, were absolutely a first love for me. As soon as I heard of their music, I thought, oh man, this is it for me.
Yeah.
And then from there on in, it also became apparent to me. I got my first drum kit after begging and pleading at around the age of 12, I
Uh-huh.
think, and it was that was still at a time when nowadays, if you're a young person, by which I mean also like physically small in stature,
Mm.
you might actually get a kit with smaller shells that you could actually sit in front of without it towering over top of you. But I had, as a very small child, the average beginner set 22-inch kick drum with, a snare and a snare drum stand that wouldn't lower properly. So you're kind of like trying to play,
You're right. Yeah, put it sit on a phone book
just
or
trying to
something. Yeah.
reach
Right,
the
right.
skins and the
Yeah, and
cymbals,
if you
but
can reach the
still.
snare, you can't reach the pedals. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly, but
Position
really
is everything.
excited to give it a shot.
Sure, sure.
And so that also really helped me connect to other people my age, that were in their own way going through um, awkwardness, but finding some sort of way through life through music. So not only did I joined, my sort of middle school band in junior high and meet a whole bunch of other band nerds. I would also meet, the punky kid, who was listening to No Means No or whatever it was,
Right.
and
Yeah, yeah.
playing electric guitar in a garage, and like they needed a drummer too, and I was just keen to get stuck into all of that.
Right, right.
So really from age 12 onwards, I just grappled everything that I could. And then when you were asking about then how I sort of moved into a more academic space,
Mm.
I guess uh, by the time I left high school, I actually did start out my university education in a jazz degree in Montreal, but quickly realized that although I might have been a pretty proficient drummer in my small town in rural Canada,
Mm.
uh, when I got to Montreal in the big city, it was clear to me that uh, I was not a virtuoso. That I could play. I was good enough to kind of scrape in to get into a fairly elite program, but at the same time, uh, I was also really interested in books and ideas,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and 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 it seemed that even if I did practice 8 hours a day, some other drummers with more natural talent
Mm.
were just sailing through technique,
Mm. Right, right.
and I could play rock and roll and loved playing rock and roll, but I wasn't a natural, you know, polyrhythmic, personality jazz drumming genius. That was never in the cards for me.
Wow.
So it's sort of, but at the same time, I was really interested in ideas and history,
Mm.
and 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 not all of my other drumming compatriots in the music department were, right? That was
Sure.
something that kind of made me a little
Unusual.
different from the others, but not in a bad way, I guess. And I
No.
thought maybe I can kind of connect my love of the drums uh, with thinking about like I was asking all kinds of questions, like why do we think some music is beautiful and other music is terrible? Like how do we even make those decisions? For whatever reason, I was as obsessed with those types of questions as I was with like discovering, oh, like a new Tortoise record or a new
Right.
Max Roach,
Right.
solo I
Right.
hadn't heard before or whatever it was.
Right. Right.
Um, and so that sort of began my academic journey, I guess, like away from thinking of myself as a performer and more as someone who used their love of performing, where they had some aptitude in that area, but
Right.
maybe not enough to easily, I mean, very few have the aptitude to easily make a living playing the drums,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's
That's absolutely
it's
true.
not an easy
Yeah.
gig.
No, no.
You
How I've done it, I couldn't tell you because I'm sure that if you put us side by side, I'm sure that my technique and your technique are probably not significantly different. Like I'm not a technique drummer.
Sure. Yeah.
Again, being from the Ringo school, I focused on because I was self-taught. I didn't focus on technique, and I'm one of those people who will tell you that I'm not really interested in virtuosity on almost any level. It's not interesting to me. I came to music because I love the sound of rock music, which to me in its best forms is usually very brutal. I went
Yeah.
through my Neil Peart phase. Absolutely. I went through my Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Genesis. I did all that stuff. And in the long run, when I started playing in bands in New York City, and that's the thing that I had because I did live in New York City, my opportunities to be a drummer were many. If
Hmm.
once I started going into the city and hanging out in my late teens, early 20s, the opportunities were left and right. Hey, everyone had a band, and
Sure.
everyone needed a drummer who was, and I had developed I wasn't very good, but I was solid and I could keep really good time. Guess I was kind of, I was a good, I was excitable, so I kind of leaned forward a little bit. I was a Stuart Copeland addict at that particular point.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, no, absolutely not. I did have to for some year. I was so obsessed with Stuart Copeland for so many years between like 78 and 81 that I literally had to I had to take him out. I started playing in bands and I realized I kept doing all these Stuart Copeland things where they were completely wrong. I was playing in sort of garage rock bands and doing these hi-hat chattery things and doing a big snap on the four before the chorus. Bap, I'm like, this doesn't sound right. And this guy, I've got to, I was doing it so naturally for so long, I had to take it out. But yeah, that was the opportunities were there, and so I started in earnest to play in all kinds of different bands and never said no. And that that was we're lucky that was there for me to sort of join this band and that band and have these opportunities, and then it sort of took its own course, one after another after another. It was one, hey, we want to join this thing, and suddenly, yeah, it was opportunities, and one after another.
Yeah, of
So I was
course.
lucky that I ended up where I did. Like I said, considering the fact that I don't really rate myself very high on a technical level, I think as a drummer, I always went for just aesthetics.
Yeah.
Philosophy of drumming. I think you're right. I don't think drummers talk enough about philosophy and a mindset of drumming. I always wonder what drummers think about when they're playing. What are they focusing on? Are they completely somewhere else? Are they here? Are they listening to some specific thing? Are they, I love that moment where you're inside and outside at the same time. You're creating something, but also kind of listening to it while you're doing it, judging
Yeah.
it. That sort of Zen moment. I think that's to me, the ultimate thing I'm looking for. That kind of.
And I think the personality of a drummer, or indeed any musician, is actually a huge part of what makes music an art that I connect with, right? It's
Mhm.
not, you know, I can be dazzled by, skill and technique, but it's not my favorite. And doesn't there's absolutely a place for it. As a Canadian, I'm sort of duty bound to allegiance to Neil Peart, right?
Sure.
And
No,
I
I
had
think I
I
think it's a national. He's a national treasure, no doubt.
yeah, and I had his poster on my wall, of course, as well, and did my best to play along to all those records. But you know, day in, day out, whether it's a famous canonical band or just an up and coming DIY band that I'm catching in my local bar, what excites me is is the personality coming through the performance of music, and you can hear that. It's more difficult to quantify, than like, okay, can you rattle off rudiments at BPM X, Y, or Z? It's a, but it's no less important. It's more important, I think. And so the personality that comes through, for drummers and other musicians as well is absolutely essential, I think.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
not to be dismissed.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm always fascinated. I don't know if you've done this as a musician. I often meet whole other bands. I've never met them, and then I play this game where I try to determine from with the way they look, what instrument they play, which one of these guys,
Yeah.
which one of these people is the bass player. And I think I'm right more often than I'm wrong. But I'm also fascinated by the personality of, well, because I'm a drummer, I'm fascinated with the personalities of bass players to this I can't figure
Of
them out.
course.
I think that's the next book
Yeah.
you need to write is about trying to decode bass players' personalities. Those are the bass players are the strangest people I've ever met in my life across the board. They tend to they have a if I start talking about it, I'll go completely off the rails. But I had this thing about bass players where they're yeah, I think because of the position of that instrument in the context of music, how it sort of sits in this bridge position between rhythm and melody, and is understated and yet really integral to how things sound. It brings a certain personality type to the fold. They're not generally flashy, but they can be highly intellectual. It's a really brainy instrument. It
It
gravitate.
certainly can be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It can grab.
absolutely.
I think people who do that, play that instrument, tend to gravitate. Anyway, your next book will be about bass players. I keep coming back to this, and I'm going back to the man. I grew up listening to the Beatles, and there's a particular track, and you've studied the history of drumming, and part of it has to do with electronics. Modern drumming has to do with now electronics and the addition of the machinery of recording
Yeah.
has led to a world where drummers more than they did back in the day are they have an imperative to sort of be more perfect in terms of their tempo cognition. Their ability to keep solid time has changed over the last decades because of the invention of the proliferation of drum clicks and drum machines. And I grew up in this, like I said, I grew up in the 70s, and by the 80s, it was imperative to kind of play more like a machine because that's what everything sounded like. Everyone was making
Yes.
demos with their Casios and their Kawais, and as a drummer, like you felt like, oh, I have to get this kind of stentorian kind of sound, and it kind of incorporated into the way drummers played, and so that's been a big thing. Tempo perception and perfection has become an issue for drummers. I still grapple with it because while I've spent a lot of time trying to be at home with a click and play with it and develop a good sense of time myself. Where's the line? Is it okay if I can play without the click and I think my time is still good, but when I go to record, I still might use the click as a safety net, so that and often now in modern recording you have to do things in pieces. So if you have a grid underneath, it's easier for people to lay things on later, as opposed to
Yeah.
sort of a random performance, which may speed up and slow down. It maybe gets harder to send something out, and someone wants to put another part over it. There's some sort of fluctuation. It just like makes things easier, but it's not absolutely necessary. So my question is this: before we go to our second meeting, I was obsessed with "Tomorrow Never Knows" because
Oh yeah.
a friend of mine, in a discussion, I grew up listening to that song my whole life, and some years ago I had a discussion with a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, about the loop, it's all the tape loops in that song, which are fascinating, way ahead of their time." And he said to me, "Well, that the bass and drums, that's a loop too." And I said, no, that's just Ringo playing for 3 minutes, which I never thought about it. I'm like, well, no, what do you mean that the drum, what? And I argued with him, and he was adamant. He said, no, I'm pretty sure. And it set me off on a journey, and I listened back to it, and I sent it off to an engineer, and I said, Chris Shaw, he did a Not a Surf record, and he'd done Dylan records. He knew what he was doing. I said, Chris, can you tell him, look, put this in Pro Tools. Is this Ringo or is this a drum loop? And he was absolutely sure within seconds that it was a drum loop. It's too perfect. It never changes time. It's exactly the same. There's no fills. There's no dynamic. And McCartney, who's also playing a pedaling on C through the whole thing. Also, McCartney, who's a natural, wants to, do some stuff, throw a little, he's a natural commenter. They all were.
Yeah.
It's completely straight. There's nothing. And it dawned on me that, in fact, it is a loop, and they don't talk about it. Jeff Emmerich, I found an interview with Jeff Emmerich, their engineer for that record, and he's like, no, we picked out a 2-bar phrase, and we cut it into a thing because he joked. He said that, well, Ringo, of all people, couldn't hold time like that for 3 minutes, and he laughed and said, this is an interview he was doing with an audience. He said, no, I gave Ringo a lot of stick, but I know he's the greatest. I mess with him, but he's great. But it's a loop. And to my knowledge, I can't find any example of a drum loop before
Any
that.
earlier than that.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah.
I haven't been. They were. I mean, I don't even know what the next one would have been. Somewhere in the 70s. Like where did they start using drum loops?
Yeah, really good question, actually. I'm just trying to think of the first part of that question. Like, is there anything that you can point to that's any earlier than that? And I guess my initial instinct would be that we'd have to look to the world of like musique concrète and
Exactly.
avant-garde composers who were playing around with tape loops and probably not integrating a drum kit as an instrument into that world, but would more than likely have been putting in like some sort of ostinato or repeated rhythmic pulse, right?
Right.
So it sort of depends on then how we talk about drum loop. Does the first drum loop have to have an acoustic drum kit being played, recorded, and then being looped in order to fulfill that criteria?
Right.
Or would something that might have, say different electronic pulses? I know, for instance, that there was an animator, an experimental filmmaker, I believe his name was Norman McLaren, and he did sound experiments where he would cut into celluloid film. He would make little incisions that would create, when
clicks.
read,
Yeah.
clicks, and sometimes little pulses, essentially.
Right.
And you could imagine if you have a lower pulse and a higher pulse with our 21st century ears, we would hear that as, or at least I would hear it as a kick and snare of some kind.
Sure.
Or a kick and hat, and even though that wouldn't be how most people would have perceived it in the 1950s when those experiments were happening.
Right.
So certainly we can talk about tape. Tape comes in post-World War II, right? Because that was a technology that the Americans discovered in Germany. So that no one in the United States was using tape prior to the Second World War, and then tape gradually spread. So in order to have a tape loop, you first need a tape.
Right. Of course.
And then you need to think about those rhythmic pulses and how we might define the criteria for a drum loop. So for me, I have quite a loose definition of what constitutes a drum kit. For me, in fact, it's a matter of consensus, and that social consensus gets shaped over time, right?
Right.
So I am happy, although not everyone would agree with me, and I fully realize that like say a Roland 909 or whatever drum machine is your favorite, that to me there is something drum kitty about
right. Well, it's
that
emulated.
it participates in a concept that we would call the drum kit.
Right.
And whether or not that drum machine, it could be classified as a sort of drum kit, in a way depends on who you're talking to and what year you're in, and and what the context is.
Sure.
And rather than saying, oh, this was definitively the first drum loop, or this was definitively the second drum loop, I'm less interested in trying to make an argument that, oh, this was definitely the first or this was definitely the last, and more interested in the arguments and disputes that unfold between people to make sense of those ideas. To
Yes.
me, that's the more interesting avenue of inquiry,
Right. Yeah.
if that makes
Right.
sense.
No, absolutely. Because I've seen, you talk about, I've seen in other interviews where you talk, people asking like, what is the definitive moment of the birth of the drum set? And a lot of people would gravitate to the bass drum pedal because it seems like the obvious linchpin between before and after. This allowed
Yeah.
drummers a new, another limb onto the kit as opposed to like playing the bass drum across between a snare drum and, they're both on a chair or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but it's a
But also similarly, there are interesting implications of trying to make those definitive decisions as well that get tied up in like whose story are we privileging as well? Like the
yes,
Beatles,
yes.
we could say that they're the first to do a lot of things, but they had, not the whole time, but certainly after 1964, unprecedented access to studio time,
Right.
to a large mass audience who would automatically, their ability to disseminate an idea which may or may not have been theirs, but would have been their use of it would be the first time a lot of people encountered it,
Right. Right.
because they had so many people interested in them. You could almost say they invented, almost every aspect of 1960s music in some way, but that actually ignores, and deprivileges the contributions of people who maybe were tinkering away somewhere, who didn't have an idea that was popularized with an audience. So, for instance, to say that that's the first, instance of a repeated drum loop, a lot of people might say, no, actually, it was Cool Herc in 1973,
Right.
taking two turntables and taking, um, you know, and okay, it wasn't a loop, but he was creating that beat juggling that allowed that drum break to be extended and created a whole culture which came to be known as hip
Hip
hop
hop.
around that.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, he may have done that, but like by my criteria, the Beatles did kind of similar and first, because
Yeah.
there's a sort of consequence to that in how we tell history,
Right. Right. Right.
And so for me, it's really about like investigating
Yeah.
how we make those stories, how they are
Right.
constructed, that is of more interest.
But the other part of that particular drum loop story is interesting to me because of the fact that they are specifically not taking any credit for it. The Beatles have,
Yeah.
yeah, they have not spoken about it. Paul doesn't speak about it. Ringo doesn't speak about it. As a matter of fact, the interesting part of the story to me is simply that for the Beatles, who are notoriously inventive and they, ADT and all these things that they were at the forefront from. And obviously, they did take these ideas of the tape loop from these music concrete guys who, Paul and John were both, art guys who were listening to all this kind of stuff and using these ideas. They specifically are not taking credit for this particular thing, and this is, to me, that's the most interesting part. Why, if
Yeah.
they did this thing, and yet even to this day, I mean, they put out the Revolver box set a couple of years ago, and there's an in-depth detail, all those, all the tape loops, except that one. They don't
Mm.
specifically avoid talking about it, and to me, that's the real mystery that I find interesting. I have a theory that they're doing it to protect Ringo. I think Ringo's the kind of drummer, because he is self-taught, the person that he is. He has a lot of pride about his playing. He held it over George Martin for years that they had a session drummer come in their early recordings. They had Alan White come in and play on "Love Me Do." He never let George forget that. He's. Do
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
I think that there's something to that because, um, say with bringing in White as a session drummer, or um, say with Bernard Purdy, very controversially claiming that he had in fact played on
Right.
various
Right.
Beatles recordings,
Yeah.
because uh, Ringo's authority, artistry, and credibility as a drummer does occasionally get undermined for lots of different reasons, most of them very spurious.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
uh, you could imagine
Yeah.
this idea that, okay, it's a loop, would play into some sort of assumption that somehow his technique wasn't up to it, when in fact, you know, evidence very clearly shows us that the opposite is true, that he was a remarkably consistent drummer, and they almost never stopped the tape rolling for mistakes that Ringo made, right? And this
Exactly.
is one of the reasons why the Beatles were able to be so incredibly prolific throughout the 1960s, was that they had a remarkably solid drummer and one who was also very inventive. And the other key thing that many people forget about Ringo is that, he wasn't the first drummer that the Beatles had. He was brought in, and they could have had their pick of drummers, right? They were already a very hot Liverpool band
Mm,
by the time they brought Ringo on, and they selected him because
mm.
he was regarded by them as like the
Yeah,
best option
right. Well,
out of a pool of
right.
of professional musicians, right?
Right. And I think they had seen him play. They had played with him. He had sat in with
In
them on the
Hamburg,
recordings. Right.
yeah.
And I know there must have been an epiphany moment when he first after having a drummer like Pete Best, who is the most, unremarkable drummer you can possibly, you can't imagine a more mediocre drummer, I'm sorry to say, than Pete Best. There's nothing about him that is, identifiable at all.
Yeah.
And to have someone like Ringo sit down suddenly behind the kit, they must have looked at each other and said, wow, we could really use a guy like this. And I suspect it was personality too. Ringo's personality, his sense of
Absolutely,
humor,
yeah.
meshed with their personalities in such a perfect, organic way that you could see that Pete Best didn't have. It's again back to personality. He had a personality that suited the other three guys. He became
Yeah.
part of that very tight little circle very, very quickly.
As an aside, have you ever heard there's some bootleg recordings of Ringo playing drums with the Beatles in Hamburg?
Uh,
Uh,
I no, I don't know that I've ever heard that.
if you're into Beatles lore,
Well,
check them out. They're
I play in a Hamburg era Beatles cover band. That's one of my favorite
Oh, well,
things.
check it. On YouTube. You can find a recording of Ringo playing the drums with the Beatles in
In
Hamburg,
Hamburg.
and there's something about it that
Oh,
for me, it just like people say John Bonham invented hard rock, but listen to that
yeah.
recording, man, and tell me that Ringo doesn't sound a whole lot like some mad mutant cross
But
between.
you don't specifically mean the Star Club recordings, the Star Club bootlegs beside those.
Oh, that might be what I am
Maybe
referring
that's
to.
because that's of course that's the
Maybe
famous.
I'm getting confused.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
because there is I know that there's a photograph of Ringo watching the Beatles with Pete Best in a club in Hamburg. It's one of my favorite photographs. There's a big room, and the Beatles are on one side of the stage, and Ringo is sort of pressed up against the wall in the back, just watching them. A year or maybe a year and a half before he actually joined. But the Star Club recordings are the Rosetta Stone. Those are the recorded at the end of 1962, where
Yeah,
he
yeah,
is.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's brutal. And
Yes,
it's very
this is exactly what I'm saying.
yeah, it's brutal, and they're kind of amped up, and they're probably on Preludin and having a grand old time. And yeah, there's a case to be made for Ringo as the first like a heavy metal drummer. I always think that the people talk about, let's say, what's the not Why Don't We Do It in the Road, Helter Skelter as being the sort of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
pounding kind of the birth of heavy metal, which is quite possibly the case if you want to look at it that way. But also, I always try to imagine, like, had he simply chosen to play that same song in double time, he would have invented punk rock. It's if you play that
Yes,
riff,
well, exactly. I
it
think
just
there's something about the way in which that Star Club bootleg was, whatever microphone they were using or its positioning, the
yeah,
compression involved or something,
I think it was one mic
has a real
yeah.
punk energy.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
here's the thing. Like, that was obviously made on someone's like reel to reel sitting in the audience, and it was finally bootlegged and released in 1977, which was really the heart
Yeah, yeah.
of the punk movement, and I think was one of those things that birthed what became power pop in the years that followed. 78, 79, we had a resurgence of Bram Tchaikovsky and all these power pop groups. And I think the Star Club and the Knack and so forth, I think the Star Club recordings I see them as a direct, like,
It's
people were
interesting.
fired up by this sort of punk energy that the Beatles had. And I don't know, that's a theory that I have. I don't know that I can prove that, but
It's a good theory.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm listening.
yeah. So those are really quintessential to me. I some years ago I was in Hamburg with my friends, and I played in a band, and we had a record label in Hamburg. And we were there, and we went to, we did a little Beatles tour, and we went and we found the Indra, which was the first venue that they played, back off the Kaiser, back off the Reeperbahn Kaiser. The Gross Freiheit was that made that drag, and it was kind of tucked back there. And there's a little, just plaque on the wall, August 16th or 20th, 1960, Beatles for. It was the first show as the Beatles. They were first booked as the Beatles in this gig, and we were standing there looking at it. This was 2009, and 2010 was the 50th anniversary, and we looked at each other and we said, shouldn't there be a band playing that stuff in that way in this room on that anniversary? And we said, well, I guess we took it upon ourselves to form that band. And
wonderful.
Yeah, no, I'm very proud of it. We still play. We play very rarely, but it's four of my best friends. It's Mark and Eric and Doug. Doug plays in Guided by Voices, and Eric plays in Cat Power. And Mark is a writer and also a singer-songwriter. We have a number of bands together, so we were all really close friends and great musicians. And we put together that set, and we have a 90-song list. And when we play, which is rarely, we play for an hour and a break and an hour and a break and an hour and a break. We don't open for your band. We play all night, and we play all that stuff in the way that minimal microphones. I don't let them put mics on the drums. One overhead and a kick mic. That's it. We don't mic the guitar amps. You have to do it in a small room too. You don't mic the guitar amps. Only vocals through the PA. The sound of a band in 1961 was decidedly different from the sound of a band in a club, and in the modern band where everything has a microphone on it. It's very clear. Yeah. That sort of defeat.
You must let me know if you play the UK again.
We hope to. We get to play so rarely. Everyone's everywhere, and we're on different parts of the country. We're dying actually to come and play in Liverpool. We have some friends. We keep talking about it. We would kill. We've played in Hamburg on a number of occasions, like I said, and a few shows here in the States. But that is our specialty. We are students of that particular era.
Fantastic.
And playing those songs is, I keep calling it the Rosetta Stone of rock and roll music. Certainly for their music, it's all the stuff that they melded together into their own sound. So it's a great, pre-Beatles genre. It's the greatest music to play, and I'm lucky to have these great friends, musicians, to play it with, so we can. Well, you immediately you feel like, is this what they felt like? Those nights at the Indra, like, is this kind of what it was like? Here I am, and and it's this sort of this method of taking the thing you love and sort of we've all sort of internalized it as musicians, and then you get to shoot it back at an audience who loves it as well, and they get to see musicians who are loving it in that same way. That's the cycle. Musicians who are turning each other on, and then the audience is drawn into it. By definition, you just can't escape it. I was thinking earlier about Keith Moon, what an influence he's on me, because he, again, not the greatest technician. On his own, you might not have rated him. If you hear him play alone by himself, it sounds could be a horrible mess. But when he played in the context of that music, he was fully involved. You see him singing along with Daltrey's, he knows every word, and this drumming seems to be a response specifically to the music that's around him. Ringo said the idea of sort of practicing alone by myself in a room, like, why would I ever do that? It only makes sense when, as a response to other music, someone starts playing the guitar, I come in, bap, and then I give it this, I put a frame around it, and then it starts to make sense. That's how I see the instrument too.
It's almost as if the other musicians in the band are putting that frame around, and then Moon is the one who's pointing the edges out to everyone. He's pushing it here, pushing it there, and making you aware of the whole shape of it through almost undermining it at various points.
Yeah. I'm fascinated with the fact that that Keith, unlike other drummers, played not merely a symmetrical drum set, because most drummers play high to low. Boom. He had a symmetrical kit. It was a cymbal, 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 3 matching toms across the front, 14, 14, 14. And I thought for years, how did he tune those? But you don't hear on Who records fills that go up and down. You just hear a rumble. And I finally found an interview with Entwistle, who was like, he didn't tune them really at all. He just wanted to have things to hit. So it was like the 3 high ones and some low ones. He just wanted to have a drum everywhere that if he missed one, there would be another one next to it. So so his sound was like kind of a high tom and a medium tom and a low tom, so he could get this big rumbling sound. It wasn't about playing boom, 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 having a spread of drums. It was about having this big rollicking, rolling, thunderous kind of thing underneath him. Completely different mindset than most average drummers who, again, like, if I'm going to have 3 drums, I want a 10, a 12, a 13, a 16, an 18. I want to go down. It was not his concern at all. His approach to the instrument was completely unorthodox, almost on every level, the way he held the sticks. Most drummers would look at it and say, well, that's completely wrong. Like, what? He seemed to held them with his, his hands over the top, his elbows out. He did everything wrong, and it worked beautifully.
And Ringo would describe himself the same way, actually, for that matter.
Right. They were unique because they were wrong. He was a lefty playing on a right-handed kit.
Exactly.
All his technique, a lot of what you perceive as his signature style is based on the fact that he had to, he had to sort of reach over and wait a second before he had to play a fill. He had to get his hand in the other place. He couldn't just go around the kit up to down because he was leading with the other hand. Absolutely fascinating to me, these sort of the drummer and their relationship to the instrument, how they're his weird once very small crash ride, and I noticed that his kit is almost there's a jazz drummer, famous jazz drummer, who played the same kit, 13, 16, 22, small 18-inch ride and a 20-inch crash on the other side, which seems to be the opposite of what most drummers would do. It was one of the big. It was like not Elvin Jones, Art Blakey. Art Blakey had the same kit. I know that Ringo was not an Art Blakey fan. I don't think that could be possible, but they played the same kit. So to me, it's like that personality, the drummer sort of who is involving himself in the composition, who, maybe standing alone, it doesn't make sense, but in the context of the music, suddenly the weird noise that you make, sits in there. What else? I also wanted. Well, again, maybe this is my own personal thing. I'm going to only talk about Ringo, but Ringo's snare drum is a unique thing. I'm one of those people who thinks that Ringo's snare drum, I would elect it. And again, I know you're not for the most or the first or the best, because it's a series of things. This is not. And
but it's a fun discussion to have.
Yeah, but here's my. So I fully expect to be disagreed with. I don't mind that. But my thing is, like, his snare drum, which was a particular drum that he got kind of randomly. He got a kit in 1962 or 3, and he got this particular drum, and that stuck with him through the entire Beatles catalog. All the records, things change. They change guitars, they change amps. The snare drum remains the same. It's that same 5.5, blah, blah, blah. Gary, we talked about, I know you mentioned Gary Astridge in your book as a source, and I've gone to Gary many times to ask him Ringo-related questions. I tried to get him
I was wondering if you'd met Gary before.
No, I've never met him, but I've spoken with him back and forth on I've tried to get him to tell me the weight, the gram weight of Ringo's 18-inch cymbal. He won't tell me, but
if anyone knew, it would be
be him. And I think maybe it's proprietary. I'm sure he knows, but he's being cagey about it. I'm like, hey, Gary, if I find an old A from like 1961 that's like 900 grams, is that too heavy or too light? He won't tell me specifically. I know he wrote a book just recently about Ringo's, not merely Ringo's instruments, but also about his fashion style, which is also a fascinating subcategory to me. That Ringo was also like all the Beatles, was a very fashionable individual and had a he was a very flash dude. You can see it all in Get Back. You can see how flashed all these guys were. Their style was...
Yeah, what a fantastic film.
Oh, my gosh. I can't get over it. I watched it at least 3 times. I have to watch... I haven't seen there's Michael Lindsay Hogg's original version has finally been I haven't seen that one yet. The re-release of Let It Be.
Nor have I. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's whatever service it's on now. I don't subscribe to it. Eventually, it'll become more widely available. Because I love that film too. I think it was unfortunate that it got the sort of reputation for being dark and sad. Though there are some sad moments in it, I think it's dark, but most because what they saw was a third generation. No one saw the original one. They saw a tape of a tape of a tape. It was some grainy thing that they got as a bootleg of a bootleg. So I think that sort of gave it a sort of a darkness that it probably didn't deserve. But yeah, that's my mindset. To me, he became the alpha and the omega. That he represented everything that I thought was great about drumming. It wasn't about technical ability. It was about musicality and about how you use your particular skill set. Because I see drumming, I was drawn to drumming, I think, because I was a theater person and a stage person, and I loved the stage, and I loved being in theatrical productions because that's teamwork. I tried to play sports, but that didn't appeal to me at all. There was the teamwork of a band that I really liked, and between like my love for the stage, the drumming was a natural. That allowed me to do both those things: have the teamwork of a band, everyone working together to try to fight, try to get signed or whatever your thing was, or get gigs. So it was the teamwork of a band and how I was able to use my particular skill set to help that process along. I think to me was the beauty of drumming. I didn't need to be Steve Gadd. I just needed to get this band to sound right, and we'd be off. Yeah,
100%. The drum kit, I guess, because it's not usually considered a solo instrument, is it belongs in a social setting. You're always part of an ensemble, and hugely important in cohering that ensemble.
Right.
Yeah, it's. I think I'm drawn to it for similar reasons, and probably lots of drummers are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like I feel really remiss, Matt. I know we could probably talk for a long time. I think our time is about up, and there's probably a million things that I should have asked you that I didn't. But I do want to say that I have like goosebumps right now thinking about it. But I'm so happy to have gotten to talk to you even about what we've talked about so far. I think there's a million things, and I'm going to keep going back to the book and gleaning stuff from it. So I really appreciate you talking to me today.
It's a pleasure, man.
I wish we could have. It was like I said, it's probably a million things that I could have asked you, and I'll like later on in the day, I'm like, why didn't I? God damn it! Why didn't I ask him about that?
Well, we'll have to do it again.
All right, if I come up with a series of other questions, I'll re-interview you at that point. And if I'm playing anywhere near you, I know Not a Surf is coming up to Canada in October. Are you in Canada? Are you in Canada right now?
So,
are you in Scotland?
I'm a Canadian abroad. Exactly.
You're in Scotland. We are. I don't know that we have any English shows coming up just yet. But we always end up in, we play either King Tut's or someplace in Glasgow or something like that. So we'll be there ere long. Let's put it that way.
Well, absolutely.
And I would love to have. And if you want to come, come on. I would love to.
Holler.
Oh man, I would be so honored if you came. I'd be out of my mind. But yeah.
Well, it would be an absolute pleasure, man. Really great talking to you.
Matt, thank you so much, and I hope we get to speak again and meet each other actually in person, man. It's been a great honor. Thank you so much.
That'd be great. Thank you, man. All right. Bye for now, dude.
Have a great day. Thank you, Matt.
You too.
I'd like to thank Matt Brennan for giving me his time and having this conversation with me. Please find his book, Kick It, A Social History of Drumming, wherever you possibly can. Well, we're coming to the end of the first season here on A Hard Day's Late Night, and I've held back these last 3 episodes to close out the season because it's the culmination of many years of thought, planning on my part, and besides, it's coming up on the holidays, and when is a better time to gift my friends with a few Beatles-themed shows? So we'll see you next time for episode 11 of A Hard Day's Late Night with Ira. Roll credits, boys!
It's a hard